tied in with that theory of the Christ myth theory is another element that Jesus is a astral or solar type deity, usually a ripoff from pagan myths. Zeitgeist the Movie, which was big back in 2007, a film by Peter Joseph that blended skepticism, metaphysical spirituality, and conspiracy theories. One of the elements of the movie was this. I remember people were passing it all around the internet at that time. It disputes, of course, the historicity of Jesus, teaches that 9/11 was prearranged by New World Order forces, claims that banks manipulate world events, and the Federal Reserve is behind multiple wars and manipulates the public for one world government. But a key element that people really remembered is this idea that Jesus did not exist. Bart Ehrman disagrees. He is a skeptic. He's made millions of dollars off of books that question the validity of the New Testament, especially misquoting Jesus. But even with his stance in regards to the Bible, Paul didn't write a lot of letters attributed to him. The New Testament is filled with forgeries. We don't know everything that Jesus said accurately. Things got elaborated theologically by the time you get to the Gospel of John. Stuff like that is what Ehrman believes. Even he says Jesus existed, and those vocal persons who deny it do so not because they have considered the evidence with a dispassionate eye of the historian. By the way, the dispassionate eye of the historian, Bart Ehrman doesn't have the dispassionate eye of the historian. He is claiming neutrality, but we all know that neutrality is a myth. But nonetheless, he's right here despite his stance of dispassion. But because they have some other agenda that this denial serves, perhaps the same could go for you, Bart. And so when you look at opposition to the Christ myth theory, it is not limited to guys like me, Christian apologists, Maurice Casey, agnostic skeptic, John Dominic Crossan. Bart Ehrman wrote a book, Did Jesus Exist? The answer is yes. Could you turn me up just a little bit? Marcus Borg. They don't all agree. We wouldn't agree with them, but even they understand that's wrong. We're not covering that tonight. Here's what we're focusing on. That virtually all the details about Jesus originate by repurposing pagan ideas, usually from the Egyptian or Greco-Roman mystery religions. This is the other element that often goes with the idea that Jesus never existed, because it's like, well, then where did this stuff come from, right? And these folks would claim that by examining supposed parallels with Jesus, Osiris, Horus, and others, we can conclude that Jesus never existed and the New Testament is mythological. But I want you to know the New Testament is filled with eyewitness testimony. It says so numerous times. The New Testament will tell you when it's an eyewitness and tell you when it isn't. Luke says he wasn't, but he interviewed them, for example. The Bible itself in the New Testament warns against fraud and fraudulent letters. And this is pretty early. This is from a diagram created by J. Warner Wallace. You have the life of Jesus, 1 to 33. By the way, guys, there is no 0. It goes 1 to 1. Mark writes his gospel approximately there. And you got Luke. Then you got Paul really early, and Paul's quoting Luke. This is somewhat of an early dating, but even if you dispute this, the New Testament letters are written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses, I believe, before the temple was destroyed, and there's reasons for that. But even most skeptical or mainstream scholars don't put it too far after that, because already by 125, you have a copy of the Gospel of John, a fragment rather. And so that shows you it's in existence, because that fragment was in Egypt. Now, we only need, as Christians, the New Testament, ladies and gentlemen. I pray that you believe that and let it sink in your heart. But if we did not have the New Testament, do you know we could still look at a number of ancient historians or ancient writers who were not Christians, like Josephus, Thallus, Tacitus, Phlegon, Marabar, Serapion, and I'm not even naming everybody. And just from them, within 100 years or so of Jesus' life, you could know that he lived in Judea, was a virtuous man, had wondrous power, could predict the future, was a wise king of the Jews. That specific reference is from Marabar Serapion, was accused by Jewish leaders, crucified by Pilate, Tacitus specifically mentions that. During the reign of Tiberius, darkness and earthquake, that's Thales, reportedly rose after death. These are not believers, remember. Believed to be the Messiah, called the Christ, that's Josephus. Followers called Christians, and the superstition spread, that's Tacitus. But Christ mythicists say, how do I explain Jesus' ministry of Jewish monotheistic preaching, healing, miracles, prophecy, and resurrection? Osiris. That's what they say. But this suffers from something that scholars have coined, I'm not making up the term, parallelomania. Parallelomania. Can you say it with me now? 3, 2, 1. Parallelomania. One more time for the record. Parallelomania. You guys got it. Parallelomania assumes genetic dependence based upon fallacious reasoning. Oh, look, these two things are similar. One must be from the other. It's not necessarily the case. And it ignores differences by special pleading. Oh, well, the Christians had to make something different when they ripped off the gods, so they'll explain the differences away by Christian fabrication as distinction, but the similarities as Christian imitation. And it's ad hoc. Ad hoc means after the fact. So you add on facts that don't correspond to your thesis, and they have to make it ad hoc to evade data. For example, you'll see this a lot of times, and it's supposed to shock you. Look, everyone, a mother and a child. Jesus must be ripped off from Egyptian gods. Let's just stop and think here for a second. This picture, is it a page from the Bible? Do you see what I'm saying? This mosaic of sorts? Is it from the Bible? This is art. Later Christian art. So even if the Christ myth thesis that Jesus was ripped off from pagan gods was true, comparing a statue where you have child suckling with mother, which is a very common thing, by the way, in art. I think I might have pictures of me and my mom when I was a baby, to Jesus art centuries later doesn't even prove the thesis, because this is not the origin point of Christianity. I want you guys to understand this. When you see something like that, say, what does it have to do with the origin of Christianity? It doesn't even have anything to do with it. Yet, nonetheless, memes like this exist. Your copycat God. What? Osiris, son of God, was resurrected so that we too could have eternal life? That's nonsense. Jesus, son of God, was resurrected so that we too could have eternal life? You say that sounds about right. Was Osiris resurrected? We're going to get into it, but I just can't resist already saying something about it. Osiris never came back to the land of the living. After he was killed by his brother Seth in the Egyptian mythology, what was his job description after that? Lord of the underworld. Yes, exactly. He ruled the realm of the dead after. That is not a resurrection. And it's not so that you could have eternal life. The Egyptians saw it sort of as almost as a template in a way. It gets kind of complicated because there's various versions, but that's not what's going on. But they'll frame it a certain way. Horus equals Jesus. Got another meme for you. Only begotten son. Virgin birth. Let's just stop there. Horus, virgin birth. Anyone ever seen those old Egyptian facsimiles and there's like a falcon? She's like got her wings and there's like a guy on a table. It actually made it to the Book of Abraham and the Book of Mormon, or the Pearl of Great Price, rather. You guys ever seen that? There's a falcon over the guy in the table. What's going on there? That is, it gets pretty wild, but basically it's not a virgin birth when you talk about this situation. What you have is you have things like this, where a guy dies and then the lady turns into a falcon and then has sex with his corpse as a falcon. And they'll call that a virgin birth. Or I know he's not on the screen, Mithras, for example. They'll say he was conceived of a virgin. Mithras, a Persian god, right? They'll say Mithras. Mithras emerged as a full adult from a rock, wearing a figurine cap and a knife to slay the cosmic bull. That's not a virgin birth. But they'll tell you Mithras was born of a virgin. I guess the rock probably was a virgin. But so is this table by that estimation. you see what I'm saying? So don't be fooled by these. What about Mother Mary? Mary, this is literally basing it upon similar phonetic sounds to the ear, right? And Mary, by the way, the M-E-R-I from the Egyptian is more of a title. Everybody was called Mary. In fact, there was a Lake Mary in ancient Egypt. 12 disciples, no evidence of that. Crucified to death, not true. Rose to the dead, not really. Star in the east, 3 wise men. 3 wise men. Why is that irrelevant to the story of Jesus, everybody? How many wise men were there, everybody? No one knows, doesn't say. It says they brought 3 gifts. 3 gifts. How many wise men were there? Son God, Son of God. We're literally doing this. It keeps on going, though. Jesus Horus. Birthday celebrated on December 25th. Now, notice they had to put celebrated in there, but a lot of times they won't even do that. Why is Jesus' birthday celebrated even on December 25th? Why is that not relevant? The Bible doesn't say Jesus was born December 25th. By the way, there's no evidence that Horus was either. There's no evidence that Horus was either. You have to track these things down. But they don't just stop with the Egyptian gods, even though that will be our focus tonight. They'll put a whole bunch of them. It's like throwing something up against the wall, but doesn't this kind of make you think Horus, Krishna, Attis, Mithra, Dionysus, Jesus Christ? Well, wait, which one is it? Which one is Jesus modeled after? Often they'll be like, well, parts of all of them. It's an unclear thesis often. See, there's Mithra up there. 12 disciples. That's not true. We have one painting where he's surrounded by 12 stars of the zodiac, and they'll say that's his 12 disciples. But it's 12 stars. It doesn't have anything to do with disciples. Dead for 3 days? No evidence of that. You have to go to the primary source instead of the meme. Resurrected? No evidence of that. And it goes on and on with these. But we can make memes too. My friend Lenny Esposito made a meme. 5 problems with the Horus/Jesus myth. It uses loaded language. They'll say, for example, he was baptized. And you read the account, and it's a guy who was murdered and thrown into the Nile River. That's not a baptism, right? Sources say a different story. So the description will tell you one thing. Then you say, where does it say this God was born on December 25th? And you can't find it. Reanimation versus resurrection. Some of these gods will in some way be given some form of life again, like the one who was chopped up into 14 pieces. That's reanimation. That's different than resurrection. Mystical versus virgin birth. They'll have miraculous births, like one god was sewn into the thigh of another and he was born out of the thigh. But that's not a virgin birth. It would be a mystical birth, but not a virgin birth. And the Christmas date dangle. We've seen that. Here's the kind of books that are used. This is John G. Jackson. He's now dead, but look what he said in his book, Christianity Before Christ, which is a pretty popular book in the conscious community. The Egyptian analogies to the Christian epic are so close in some cases as to suggest, notice even how the qualifications here, in some cases as to suggest an Egyptian origin for certain Christian doctrines and rites. But I've read this whole book. It does not have the evidence to back up the claim on page 21. Neither does Stolen Legacy, which is another very popular book in the conscious community. Neither does Christ in Egypt, written by Archaea S. Neither do the Jesus Mysteries, which the cover literally is a known forgery, which the authors were told that's a forgery. Well, it still proved the point. Or the Christ Conspiracy, the greatest story ever told. A lot of this comes from Gerald Massey. The book looks fancy, but we might talk a little bit about Massey later on, and we'll find out that these guys didn't really know what they're talking about. But in a sense, Massey's been resurrected via Tom Harper, the pagan Christ, recovering the lost light. Canadian gentleman. Now, according to Tom Harper, there's no evidence that Jesus ever lived. He claims that all the details of his life, his teachings, have counterparts in Egyptian religious ideas. He does not quote in this book any contemporary Egyptologist or recognized academic authority on world religions nor does he appeal to the standard reference works in Egyptology or primary sources. Primary sources means it's not hearsay, it's direct from the practitioner or an eyewitness who is writing directly or relaying directly about something. But yet they assert this book is essentially entirely dependent on Massey and a guy named Higgins and another guy named Kuhn. And they argued that all the essential ideas of Judaism and Christianity come primarily from Egyptian religion. Let's take a little quick look here at Kuhn, since he's a source for a lot of these guys. The book looks fancy. Seems like he might know what he's talking about. But who is this man, Alvin Boyd Kuhn? He's given the title Egyptologist, and Harper calls him one of the single greatest geniuses of the 20th century, who towers above all others of recent memory and intellect and his understanding of the world's religions. It's okay to be a high school language teacher, but don't claim to be an Egyptologist. That's what Kuhn was. He was also an enthusiastic proponent of theosophy, strange religious belief system. He was an author and a lecturer and self-published most of the books. Now let's take a look at Massey, for example. Now let's give one example of the errors. Here's what he said in his book, Ancient Egypt. The Karas is literally the god or person who has been mummified, embalmed, and anointed or Christified. Notice how they take Christian language and try to apply it so you think about mummification as Christified. It's a trick to use that language. There is no other origin for Christ the Anointed than Horus the Karas. No other possibility. Or anointed son of God the Father. It sounds very Christian, right? He's describing it, though, in his words. What is he quoting? Is he quoting from the Egyptian Book of the Dead here? Is he quoting from the inscriptions on the wall? No. There is no other origin for a Messiah as the anointed than for the Masu or anointed. Maybe the Old Testament has the origin. Maybe when Jesus opened up the scroll in Hebrew and read in Luke 4 from Isaiah 61, you get a sense of where it comes from. But this is what he says. But what's the truth? Shout out to MJ Jackson and BK Apologist for help on the slides, by the way. Chris, KRST, transliterated, simply translates as burial. This is from the Egyptian Hieroglyphic Grammar, 2002. So, of course, that word appears on coffins. Yet he tries to make a whole thing out of it. That's where they got Christ from. That's a grammar book, but apologists have written books that totally defeat this idea. If you want the two best ones, The Historical Jesus by Gary Habermas, Ancient Evidence for the Life of Christ. He surveys like 17 non-Christian sources and shows like 30, 40-some facts you can learn about Jesus just from non-Christian sources. Unmasking the Pagan Christ. Porter and Bedard totally take Harper to town in this book. That's not the only two I recommend, but those are the best ones to start with. Some others on the screen: Reinventing Jesus, Shattering the Christ Myth, Come Let Us Reason, The Bible Among Myths. That's a great one. Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, and a website by J.P. Holding Tectonics Apologetics. Now let's go back further, not just to Jesus, but the general worldview of the Bible and ancient Egypt. Anthony Browder, who the conscious community holds up as a scholar, says this in Nile Valley Contributions to Civilizations. There's a different book on the screen, but that's Anthony. In both the Nile Valley account and the Christian account, God is self-created. Is Yahweh self-created? What does Yahweh mean, everybody? I am, I exist, I be. Hasn't he always been? Did he come into existence? No, he's eternal. He is literally the eternal God. So even in the description of Christian theology, they get it wrong. If somebody says God is self-created, which is a contradiction, how do you create yourself if there is no self to create? Some of these gods came into existence where they sneezed. But how do you sneeze if you're not there? Creates heaven and earth, divides the waters, creates the light, separates from darkness, and creates man. And he says the parallels between the two religious systems are numerous and striking. Let us go directly to a coffin text. The book is on the screen. I'm going to read from a coffin text here. The Creator God then says the following: I brought my flesh into being by my own effectiveness. I am he who created myself. So he's right about the Egyptian God creating himself. But is this Yahweh? I fashioned myself as I pleased. How, bro? How do you make your foot without a hand? You know, evolutionists still have this problem. DNA requires multiple things to work all at once. You can't get one without the other. My brother back there knows. Jim knows. I came into being as one who becomes. I came into being and becoming became. Imagine how shocking it was then when Pharaoh says, who is this God that approaches me? The manifestation of Amun-Ra. Who is this? And he says, Yahweh, I am. You see the difference? I came into being and becoming become. All beings came into being after I had become into being. It really is like houseway, isn't it? The biblical worldview, God is self-sufficient. The big word for that is aseity. God has aseity. He's personal. He's transcendent, distinct from creation, yet immanent. The one who in the beginning chose based on the pleasure of his goodwill to bring about creation. Yet in these ancient Egyptian myths and from ancient Near East in general, you have what's called theogony. This is where the gods have their own origin. Gods often come into being in these accounts through bodily fluids. Cover your ears. The creator God will spit, he will sneeze, he will sweat, or he will have another type of bodily fluid that comes from a different type of activity, and that creates a god. And then these later deities are born from those other ones. In Memphite theology, Egyptian theology, by the way, is very city-related. So these are political to show this Egyptian city was better than this one. Once you read them, you realize this is just cheerleading for their city. It's like, we got this god. The gods are brought into being by a tomb, separating them from himself. Let me give you an example when I talked about parallelomania. This is the background, though. So when someone talks about Jesus, you're talking about an entirely different system. He's coming into a monotheistic context. People who, at that time, were no longer making images of their gods. The Jews had pretty much done away with that in this Second Temple period. But let's look at one, the virgin birth, more accurately called the virgin conception. Don't let anyone tell you, by the way, that it's the immaculate conception. That has to do with Mary being sinless. Protestants in the building do not believe that. We don't believe in the immaculate conception. Isis, who, by the way, was her husband's sister, was not a sexual virgin when she conceived Horus. The Egyptian text never claimed this. Horus was the result of intercourse between Isis and Osiris. And I said the way it happened was, I'm gonna repeat the story, adding some details here. Seth, the brother, was upset, pushed into a coffin, chopped him up. It's a whole thing. 14 pieces. Chopped up 14 pieces. Isis went around. In some versions, she buried all the pieces, gave him a proper burial. In other versions, she found 13 of the 14. She couldn't find his member. Why? A fish or a crab ate it of the Nile. Isn't that a bummer? Giving new meaning to a certain phrase. So she fashions a golden phallus. Then in her falcon form, arouses him and copulates to get pregnant with the son. This is literally bestiality, necrophilia, and incest. All in one. It's amazing. With Thoth's help is how she created the golden phallus, attached it to his body, and they began to copulate. Neither she, Osiris, or Horus pre-existed their birth. So what if there are some similar parallels you ever see? It's not impossible, is it? I mean, when you're talking about creation, a creation myth or origin myth is going to have some similar elements. He brought this into being, right? But how did that God get there in the first place? You're talking about life. You're talking about death. You're talking about the supernatural. So it's not a big deal if you're like, well, look, the God performed a supernatural feat. I mean, that's what we're talking about here, right? Explains the cycles. A lot of the ancient myths explain the cycles of life, death, rebirth via the gods, especially in relationship to harvest and spring. A lot of these gods are essentially like vegetative gods. So they appear and reappear with basically the farmer cycle. There's geographical proximity and cultural context with these gods. If you read the stories about Baal, the Bible subverts and co-opts some of the language that the folks who followed Baal, it uses. You know, the Bible talks about one who rides on the clouds or rides a storm. That is the way those guys would describe Baal. What the Bible is saying when it does that, it's talking trash. It's saying, you're saying your God does this. Our God actually does this. Because he's not one of many. He created it. So you can find a parallel like that, but the one example I just gave, it's because Yahweh is talking trash to the false deities. So if you say, well, look, he rides the clouds, he rides the storms too. Don't trip out. Now, later on, you had our friends that we talked about earlier when Anthony was up here, Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. They adopted certain elements of pagan festivals later on and iconography that used certain pagan symbolism for teaching people. But don't let that confuse you. That has anything to do with the origin of Jesus or the Christian religion. Now, if you're wondering some of the information about how to, there's all kinds of sources online, but this is one place where it talks about Horus and gives you the basic essence of him and his of Osiris and his sister wife Isis. You can learn a little bit about it. And some of the folks who follow, there's still people, by the way, who follows these gods and various degrees. I've debated some of them. Check out Vocab Malone, Sa-Neta TV. If you just watch, you'll see me debate some of these guys who believe in some of this stuff in the 21st century. They don't like to call it Horus because that's like sort of like the Greek name. They like to call him Heru. But he's pieced back together. So my buddy BK Apologist, he refers to him as Frankenstein Heru. Because he's put back together except for that one part, you know. But here's what else is interesting about Heru/Horus. There's different versions of him. There's the vengeful Horus, Horus the elder, Horus of the horizon, Horus the child. That's where you get these ones from that they try to put on us. It's from Horus when he's described as a child. That's the places they get those. Let's revisit this virgin birth issue briefly. I want to show you what I was talking about when I was talking about it. This is from the coffin text, what you see on the screen, from Spell 148. Yes, the Egyptians believed in spells. The Kemet guys I talked to, those are these guys who are still into this. They're like, well, we don't really like the word spell. But it's a spell. It talks about the conception of Horus, right? And there's a whole purpose there up on the screen about how this functioned in Egyptian daily life. But I'm going to read now directly from Isis talking about this situation. And you're going to see this ain't no virgin conception. Are you guys ready? Man, these folks believe some profane things, so I want to be saying stuff. You know what I'm saying? Here we go. Ho! Gods, I am Isis, the sister of Osiris, who wept on account of the father of the gods, Osiris, who parted the slaughter of the two lands. That's Upper and Lower Egypt, by the way. His semen is inside my body. Not a virgin. I have knitted the form of a god of the egg as my son. Foremost says the Ennead, who will rule this land, who will inherit from Geb, who will speak for his father, who will slay Seth. That's the brother. You gotta avenge the father's death. The enemy of his father Osiris. Come, O gods, may you provide his protection. Come, O gods, may you provide his protection within my uterus. There's a lot of room in there. Know in your hearts that this God who is in his egg is your Lord, the blue-haired one, the form of the Lord of the gods, who are great and beautiful, adorned with two plums of lapis lazuli. And here's where we get this stuff. This is directly from it. Look, so when someone tells you about Horus, Isis, Osiris, you need to be seeing pictures of this and knowing that's what it's saying. But can I tell you something? Most people don't even have this. They just have a meme and they'll tell you, well, you got to do your research. You do. But bro, you made the claim. Why am I doing your research, right? But here's the thing. Every now and then you get a guy who says, well, I can read the hieroglyphs. And then they'll misread what it says to you. This has happened time and time again. I have more quotes. I've got to pass them up. Just know by what you see on the screen that she was not a virgin in any way at all. And this is the case with all of these. All of these ones are false claims. I like this one, though. Horus was baptized by Anubis. That's Anubis. That's the jackal-headed god, the baptizer. Just notice how different their gods are, by the way. So the parallel is supposed to be just like John the Baptist. Their God got baptized, right? Can I tell you about Anubis, though? He was the god who was supposed to be like the god of embalming, right? So he would embalm the dead. That's what they're talking about. That's not baptism, though. I'm quoting now from the Routledge Dictionary of Egyptian Gods and Goddesses. So this is sources, either primary or experts who are directly in contact with the primary sources. He was the, quote, canine god of cemeteries and embalming. Does that sound like John the Baptist to you? His most usual form is that of the crouching desert dog. In the Pyramid era, Anubis is closely allied to the monarch who is described as having Atum's body but the face of Anubis. Sounds painful. False. We've only covered a few, and we haven't even covered all the ones they give, but let's cover one more. There's a lot to this one. Horus died and rose, just like your Jesus, don't you know? So, what happened? I'm just going to read this because it's complicated. I don't want to mess it up. This text comes from an object known as a sippus, which was intended to provide protection for Egyptians from snakes, scorpions, crocodiles, and any dangerous animals, and provide relief to those who were stung or bitten by snakes or scorpions. So that's what this is. A sippus depicted the god Horus as a nude child standing on the backs of crocodiles and clutching dangerous animals in each hand. So the idea is he'll help you if you get bit, right? You see what I'm saying? You see what's going on there? So in order to benefit from the healing power of the text, a person had to either touch the stela, that's what that is, or drink water that had been poured over the hieroglyphic texts. It's pre-COVID, you know? Sippi would be set up in bases designed to catch the water poured over them. And so here's the story, because this is one of the places where they try to say, oh, look, this god was resurrected. Are you ready? A woman came to me, famous in her town, a noble lady, foremost in her district. She came to me carrying life. Her heart was confident on account of her skill. She said, fear not, child Horus. Don't be downcast, mother of a god. The child is safe from the evil of his brother. The bush is hidden, death cannot enter it. The magic of a tomb, the father of the gods who is in the heaven, is the one who made life. Seth cannot enter the district. He cannot travel about within Chemis. Horus is safe from the evil of his brother, and his followers cannot harm him. Seek the course of this poison throughout him so that Horus may live for his mother. Perhaps a scorpion has stung him, or a greedy snake has bitten him. Then Isis places her nose in his mouth to learn the odor thereof from within the body. Gross. She identified the suffering of the divine heir. She found him to be under the influence of poison. Poor God, he drank something. He ate too many lead chips. She embraced him quickly. She jumped around him like fish do when thrown into a frying pan. Horus been bitten, O Ray. Your son has been bitten. Horus has been bitten. The minor child howled from worry. Those around the child were speechless. Nephthys came to him weeping. Her shriek pervaded the Delta marshes. Selka said, what is it? What is wrong with the child Horus? Isis called out to heaven so that the crew of Re will stop. The bark of Re will not travel while the child Horus is on his side. And basically, through a spell in all of this, he's healed from the poison. That's the short version of the story, okay? Is that a resurrection? Is that a resurrection? That's what they're talking about. There's other sources for it. There's another example, Who's Who in Egyptian mythology. You can read about these things directly. Is that like this? Is that like this? They'll tell us the dying and rising God motif is direct indication that Christians stole this doctrine from Kemet. That's the ancient word for Egypt or Egypt. Jesus is nothing other than another solar or vegetation deity. Therefore, the whole gospel narrative is a myth. Mike, are they all done? Okay. But the concept of dying and rising gods, is that even accurate? You know, humans, we like to categorize things, right? Like this is like this, so we understand it. More and more scholars have now even questioned if that is even a legitimate category. This is a really good book. And these are not Christian scholars. But let me read briefly. I don't have time to quote that book. We're running out of time here. From a nice little article. There's a screenshot, but that's not what I'm going to read from. I'm just showing you where it is online. It's the Encyclopedia of Religion. Jonathan Z. Smith. What we're going to do here is question the whole concept of dying and rising gods as a category, especially one to throw Jesus into. Oh, he was just the Jewish dying and rising God. They all had one. The Jews were like, we want one too. This is the way it's often phrased. You're like, well, I didn't know there was dying and rising gods and Jesus is just a Jew. Whoa, man. The category, once a major topic of scholarly investigation, I'm reading from the Encyclopedia of Religion here, then this is more modern scholarship, must now be understood to have largely been a misnomer based on imaginative reconstructions in exceedingly late or highly ambiguous texts. The Osirian myth can be reconstructed from the pyramid texts of the 5th and 6th dynasties. While the names of the actors and details of the incidents vary, this record is remarkably consistent over 2,500 years. Osiris was murdered, his body dismembered and scattered, the pieces of body were recovered and rejoined, and the god was rejuvenated. Again, I'm reading from the same article. It is on the screen. However, he did not return to his former mode of existence, but rather journeyed to the underworld, where he became the powerful lord of the dead. In no sense can Osiris said to have risen in the sense required by the dying and rising pattern. Most certainly was never conceived as an annual event. The repeated formula, rise up, you have not died, whether applied to Osiris or a citizen of Egypt, signaled a new permanent life in the realm of the dead, because that's what the Egyptians wanted. The Egyptians were obsessed with life after death. That's literally what the pyramids are, essentially. They're essentially rocket ships to the realm of the dead. Quoting from the article, through these parallels, the individual Egyptian dead became identified with and addressed as Osiris, perhaps earliest in pyramid text 167a, 168a. Notice, I'm not claiming to be an Egyptologist, but I could read those who are. The memes and the folks who tell you your Jesus is one of these, they never tell you exactly where to go to get the information. When they're quoting Massey, they're quoting non-experts on a subject, and the scholarship, if you want to call it that, which was not even that good then, is 100 or so years out of date. That's why we cannot be intimidated by this stuff. But things when people make little memes, fancy graphics, videos with spooky music, Jesus is also a conspiracy theory. That's all it takes sometimes, especially for our high schoolers. The myth and ritual of Osiris emphasizes the message that there is life for the dead. Again, the Egyptians were obsessed with this. Although is a different character than that of the living. This is not like our resurrection, is it? This is not what the New Testament teaches about Jesus or what we get, is it? You know it's not. What is to be feared is dying a second time in the realm of the dead. Scary picture time. Quoting from the same article, Osiris is a powerful god of the potent dead. In no sense can the dramatic myth of his death and reanimation be harmonized to the pattern of dying and rising again, gods. Again, even if that's a proper category. Let's evaluate this. If you hear one of these parallels, the best thing to do is take them head on. One great thing to do is ask the person saying it, the thing you're telling me people believed about this God, do you know the date of it? Because guess what? If what they're citing is post-Christian, how can they be claiming it influenced Christianity? And you may say, they wouldn't do that. They do that all the time. Now, and some of the ones I've been going over today, these are pre-Christian, okay? But especially with Mithraism, because Mithraism started dying out and it started copying elements of Christianity later on. So they'll quote to you a 2nd century AD truth about Mithraism, which we don't really have any text for. We have to kind of guess what practitioners did based upon other things. It's very complex. They're mystery religions. That's what Mithraism is. They're quoting often post-Christian rites, sometimes literally even citations from the medieval era that are supposedly referring to something that used to happen. That is not good evidence. We are not the ones who are believing bad evidence. This is a reality. Now, I didn't show you all those because I wanted to show you something that was pre-Christian today, but all you got to do is ask questions before you say, well, ask for, just ask, do you know the date of that? That's all you got to say. They made the claim, just ask them the date. If they tell you do your research, say, well, wait a minute, if you know the date of it, how do you know it influenced Christianity? Ask questions, people. Don't make a speech. Ask a question. Ask that question. Isn't that a great question? Or if they say, well, he baptized, do you know you don't have to be crazy about it. What's the source? But just like, do you know the source or maybe where that's found or maybe where did, if you don't want to do that specific, you could just say, that's very interesting. Could you tell me where you learned that from? People that got stuff from memes are usually embarrassed to tell you it's from a meme. So that's why they say, do your research, fam. That's why they say, everybody knows it, don't you? That's not a response. So Christians, don't be bullied, and don't be a bully when you do it. Just say, where'd you get that from? That's all I want to know. Isn't that a great question to ask? No Kemetic, again, that's what ancient Egypt is properly called, not Egypt. No Kemetic or so-called pagan savior god died for someone else. Even Mithras, who supposedly slayed the cosmic bull. Only Jesus died for sin. Isn't it clear in the New Testament, from Jesus' lips to Paul, to everyone there, to Isaiah 53, what it says about him? He is dying for sin. That's not what's going on in these myths. They don't even have this concept of sin. The Egyptians actually have some things that are close. They weigh the heart. If it's lighter than a feather, they have a whole thing. But it has to do with disorder and chaos. If you bring disorder and chaos, it's not exactly sin. I think they say ismet or something like that versus mayat. Jesus died once for all. He doesn't die again and again every cycle. He's not a dying and rising God. And by the way, that's why Rome, we love you guys, are wrong, because they got Jesus essentially being represented as dying again and again. I know they don't think that's what's happening, but that's sort of what's happening at the Mass. Jesus' death is recorded in actual history. When did Mithras slay the cosmic bull? I'm not asking for the source of the text of the claim. I'm saying, when did that happen? A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. There's not even dates often attached to these things. It's radically different than under the reign of Tiberius Caesar, by Pontius Pilate, with Herod. Radically different. What's the date? These are cosmic myths meant to be told again and again. That's why they were very fluid. They were able to change. They were able to take on new things. Jesus dies once for all. His death is recorded in actual history. Roman historians talk about the death of Jesus. They don't think he was Messiah. They're like, yeah, he suffered the extreme penalty, one historian says. He died voluntarily. It wasn't another god murdering or tricking him. Who laid his life down? His death was a triumph, not a defeat. He doesn't get, well, at least I got the realm of the dead now. He has a body better than ever. And he ascends to the Father and says, you will be like me because I'm the first fruits. Understand, I'm paraphrasing, but you guys know what I'm saying. So that's wrong. But that's right. I am done, but it seems like they're still going, so we can do a couple questions. I'm not going to be able to answer every myth that you could, but I'll try to take some questions. I'll tell you what I know and what I don't know. Jesus is not a pagan myth ripoff. Any questions, and we'll just go until they come in or a few minutes. Yeah. Post-Christian, yeah. Mithras is an example. Now the actual Mithras guy who emerges from a rock with his cap and a knife, he is pre-Christian, but the versions of Mithraism that they'll often tell you, those are from post-Christian examples of Mithraism, because it was a very fluid religion. That's one example. That's not the only one. That's the one I could think of right now off the top of my head for sure that I know, because a lot of these gods did some morphing, but I haven't seen it. But I have an atheist friend, and he was like, hey, you should watch this show, Raised by Wolves or something like that. And apparently it's a story about like Mithraists and atheists fighting each other in the future. I haven't seen it, so I'm not vouching for it. I'm just saying my atheist friend said it's cool. But is it cool, though? I don't know. But it was interesting. I was like, Mithraists? They're not around anymore. He's like, well, it's a general stand-in for faith. I was like, oh, they're trying to make the Mithraists like Christians. Like, right? As if they don't, but no one knows Mithraism is a blank slate. He's like, well, it's not really. Anyways, so apparently there's some show where they got Mithraists fighting atheists, right? My money's on the atheists. They had Stalin. He knew how to really kick some tail. Mao Zedong, I mean, he killed a lot of people. I feel like the atheists have really... Now, the Mithraists was a religion favored by the Roman soldiers, so they have that. But I think if there's really going to be a battle, the atheists, man, they really know how to kill a lot of people. So I'm going to go with them on that one. I'm being totally facetious. I told him that too. Another, Gabriel, they done, Pastor? Tell them they need to be done. Everybody? Who's still going? Go in there and, you know what I'm saying? Two more questions. Jeremiah Roberts, host of the infamous Cultist Show. Woo!
pushing them, a lot of times on primary resources, immediately the conspiratorial mindset will be like, oh, well, all those primary resources, they're there by the controller, so they're put there by the Vatican.
Right.
Immediately sort of try and find some conspiratorial way to explain it away. When they go there, like, how do you then respond? They almost apply the primary resources that they're applying to the pagan mythology.
Yeah, it's tough because when people have beliefs in some of these really those kind of conspiracy theories, they make them almost where they can't be falsified. So any evidence against the theory, and once you go down this road, is counted as evidence for the theory because it's part of the deception or how well they've hidden it. It's very difficult. When I deal with the conscious community, which is kind of a large conglomerate of people who believe all kinds of different things, you have to watch Sonnet to understand it, but watch out. It's quite a crazy ride. Some of them, not all of them, will actually say, I won't accept that if it's by a European. So it gets even harder. They'll be like, and then they'll quote Plutarch. And I'm like, what? Like, where you got that from? Plutarch? And like, that's like not really, what are you talking about? So this is something they'll sometimes do. But like, it's like, okay, then where are you getting this from? Because if they're making a claim, they've got to it's got to be in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It's got to be on a coffin text. It's got to be inscribed in a pyramid. It's got to be on a royal seal. Whatever they're saying, it's got to be somewhere. If the first place they're telling you is from the 1900s or a meme, or I mean, sometimes what I've seen is I'll try to, in a not arrogant way, explain the importance of what a primary source is. And it's been very frustrating because this is where the Hebrew Israelites more, but I had one Hebrew Israelite pull out a book and say, well, it's right here in this book. He thought that a book was, just because it was written in a page, it was a primary source. I said, no, that's not a primary. Well, to you, it's not a primary source. No, it's not. What it was. So, man, it's very difficult. And that's why critical thinking is important. That's why Christians, when we say critical thinker, we're saying thinking through the issues instead of knee-jerk reactions, where you say, well, hold on, if that's a 16th century picture of Jesus, what does that have to do with the origin of Christianity? That's just a simple, okay, But there is no easy solution. There is no easy solution because it's essentially, I'm going to not eat the steak and broccoli. I'm only going to eat McDonald's fries. That's what they're doing. They want to be over here instead of the best and only really way to actually prove your thesis. So it's problematic because you do run into that, a devaluation of primary sources. Well, what are we left with? We're left with garbage. We're left with junk. And that's what they'll point to. And like, okay, so there is no easy solution other than trying to gently educate people. But that's why we got to know a little something ourselves. But that's why you're here. One last question, because I see people moving around, so I think we're ready to go. One last quick question. In the back, how you doing? Oh, you're just waving? Oh, my bad, baby. Flick it all. Okay. Well, guys, then okay, brother. Kemet. 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 So if a person says ancient Kemet, it doesn't only mean this, but a lot of times they might even be a practicer. Sometimes they'll call themselves Kemetics, and sometimes they'll even say they follow Kemetic science. And some of these guys are essentially atheists who believe that the ancient Egyptian deities are like stand-ins for scientific realities about the natural world. So like, no, you don't understand how deep it was. And so they're not even really believers in the ancient gods. They view them as the Egyptians understood science and essentially put up these avatars almost of them. Others are true believers in Kemet. I saw a debate with my friend, Brother Jabari. He's a Kemetic guy. And he said he wore red and black to the debate because he was channeling the god of war from Egypt. Another guy believed that these really exist, but they were ancient aliens who visited Earth. But he's a practitioner. So even if someone says they're Kemet, don't say, oh, I know what you believe. They probably don't know what they believe half the time. But don't assume. Just start asking questions. You say, oh, I've heard of that. It means Egypt. And they're like, oh, okay. They might know. Just ask the questions. That's the way to go.